They called her Abeni, just another slave woman bound to the Whitlock plantation. Day after day, she worked the fields, her hands blistered, her back bent, yet her eyes stayed sharp, watching, waiting. When a young boy named Kwame was beaten to death for dropping a bucket of water, something inside her broke. That night, while her master Horace Whitlock toasted his wealth inside a glittering mansion, Abeni moved silently through the halls with a torch in her hand. The guests laughed over wine, the Whitlock family basked in comfort, until the flames began to crawl across the walls. The mansion became a furnace, screams echoing as Abeni watched the empire of her tormentors collapse in fire. This is not just a story of rebellion. It is the tale of a woman who turned oppression into vengeance and left her master's family to burn in the very house built on stolen lives. The question is, when the smoke clears, what kind of freedom is left? Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because Obooro's story is one you don't want to miss. Dawn crept across the Whitlock plantation, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink that seemed to mock the darkness below. Abeni's muscles ached as she gripped her cane knife, the wooden handle smooth from years of use. Around her, dozens of other enslaved workers moved through the sugarcane fields like shadows, their bodies already glistening with sweat despite the early hour. The sharp crack of Overseer Brant's whip split the morning air. "Move faster!" he bellowed from atop his horse. "The sun ain't waiting for your lazy bones." Abeni kept her eyes down, focusing on the rhythm of her work. Cut, strip, bundle. Cut, strip, bundle. The sugar-cane stalks were thick and unyielding, their leaves razor-sharp. Her calloused hands were crisscrossed with tiny cuts that never fully healed. Young Kwame worked nearby, struggling with stalks almost as tall as he was. His small frame trembled with effort, but determination showed in every movement. Abeni watched him from the corner of her eye, ready to step in if Brant turned his attention toward the boy. "Water!" someone called out. A young girl hurried down the rows with a wooden bucket, offering ladles to the workers. When she reached Abeni, their eyes met in silent understanding. Abeni took a long drink, letting some water spill down her chin. As she handed back the ladle, she slipped a small piece of cornbread from her sleeve into the girl's apron pocket. The morning wore on, heat rising like a physical weight. Brant rode up and down the rows, shouting and cracking his whip at anyone who slowed. His shadow fell across Abeni's workspace, and she felt his eyes boring into her back. "Still the fastest cutter we got," he sneered. "Maybe if the others worked half as hard as you, we wouldn't need the whip so much." He spat in the dirt near her feet before moving on. During their brief midday rest, Abeni found Kwame sitting alone in the shade of a storage shed. She settled beside him, checking first to ensure no one was watching. With a stick, she drew letters in the packed dirt. "Remember this one?" she whispered, sketching an M. Kwame's face scrunched in concentration. "That's the one that sounds like humming," he said quietly. "Like when Mama used to sing." "That's right." Abeni's heart squeezed at the mention of Kwame's mother, sold away the previous year. "And this one?" She drew an A. "The first letter in your name." His eyes brightened with pride. They continued their secret lesson until the overseer's horn signaled the return to work. Before standing, Abeni quickly swept away their writing with her foot, erasing all evidence of their forbidden education. The afternoon brought suffocating humidity that made breathing feel like drowning. The enslaved workers moved more slowly now, despite Brant's increasing threats. Abeni watched him circle the fields like a hungry vulture, ready to descend on any sign of weakness. When sunset finally came, the workers trudged back to their quarters, bodies bent with exhaustion. Abeni helped an elderly woman who had fallen behind, supporting her weight while keeping an eye out for the overseer's attention. In the cramped confines of the slave quarters, people spoke in hushed tones about the day's events. Abeni moved among them, sharing what little food she had managed to hide away. A few strips of dried meat, some stolen vegetables from the kitchen garden. "They're bringing in more overseers," Adisa, who worked in the big house, whispered to the group. "I heard Master Whitlock talking. Says we need more discipline." A heavy silence fell over the room. They all knew what more discipline meant. "We survive," Abeni said quietly but firmly. "We always have." She touched the scars on her shoulders, reminders of past discipline that had failed to break her. As night settled in, Abeni found Kwame huddled near the small fire they were allowed to keep. His small frame shivered despite the warm air. She wrapped her thin blanket around his shoulders and pulled him close. "Tell me the story again," he whispered. "About the people who could fly." Abeni smiled sadly, running her fingers through his coarse hair. "Long ago," she began in a low voice, "our people knew words of power, words that could lift them up into the sky, far above the chains and whips. Why can't we say those words now? Because they made us forget them. But we remember other things." She tapped his temple gently. "We remember how to think, how to read, how to keep hope alive inside, where they can't take it away." Kwame's eyes grew heavy as she spoke. She helped him lie down on his thin pallet near the dying embers of the fire. "Oba Oro," she promised, tucking the blanket around him. "You'll read better than today." Around them, other workers settled in for the night, their breathing creating a soft chorus of shared exhaustion. Some nursed fresh welts from Brant's whip, while others whispered prayers or hummed quiet songs of comfort. Through the cracks in the wooden walls, Abeni could see stars scattered across the dark sky, distant points of light that had guided so many to freedom. She watched Kwame's chest rise and fall in peaceful sleep, his face smoothed of the day's tensions. Despite everything, he still had dreams, still believed in possibilities. Abeni touched the hidden pocket in her dress where she kept a scrap of newspaper, her most precious possession. Oba Oro would bring another day of back-breaking work and constant fear, but also another chance to nurture the spark of knowledge that no overseer could extinguish. The morning sun had barely cleared the treetops when sweat already soaked through Abeni's dress. The air hung thick and still, promising another scorching day in the sugarcane fields. Workers moved in weary lines between the tall stalks, their bodies bent under the weight of endless labor. Young Kwame had been assigned water duty that morning. He struggled with the heavy wooden pail, his thin arms shaking as he made his way down the rows. Abeni watched him from her position in the field, noting how he stumbled slightly, but caught himself. "Careful now," she whispered, too softly for anyone but herself to hear. The boy's determined face showed his concentration as he approached a group of workers. His small hands gripped the pail's rope handle tightly, knuckles white with effort. He was almost there when his foot caught on an exposed root. Time seemed to slow. The pail tilted. Water arced through the air, catching sunlight like scattered diamonds before splashing across the packed earth. The hollow sound of the empty bucket hitting the ground echoed across the suddenly silent field. Overseer Brant's head snapped toward the noise like a hunting dog catching a scent. His lips curved into a cruel smile as he yanked his horse's reins, turning toward where Kwame scrambled to retrieve the fallen pail. "Well, well," Brant drawled, dismounting with deliberate slowness. "What do we have here?" Kwame's eyes went wide with terror. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean—" "Shut your mouth, boy!" Brant's boot connected with Kwame's ribs, sending him sprawling. "Everyone, gather round. Time for a lesson in responsibility." Workers emerged from the cane rows, drawn by Brant's shouts and the sick knowledge of what was to come. Abeni moved forward, her heart pounding, but strong hands held her back. "Don't," Adisa whispered urgently. "You'll only make it worse." Horace Whitlock appeared on the porch of the big house, drawn by the commotion. He stood watching, hands clasped behind his back, his face a mask of cold indifference. "Master Whitlock," Brant called out, giving a slight bow. Just in time to witness some necessary discipline. Brant's whip uncoiled like a snake. The first lash caught Kwame across his small back, tearing through his thin shirt. The boy's scream pierced the morning air. "Please," Kwame sobbed. "I'll be more careful." "Waste of water means waste of time," Brant announced to the gathered crowd. "Waste of time means waste of money. And waste of money," the whip cracked again, "means someone needs to learn their place." Abeni's nails dug into her palms until blood welled in her clenched fists. She wanted to scream, to run forward, to stop this madness. But Adisa's grip remained firm, reminding her that any intervention would only bring more death. The beating continued. Kwame's cries grew weaker. Blood soaked what remained of his shirt, turning the dirty fabric a dark crimson. Still, Brant didn't stop. "Look at your master, boy!" Brant grabbed Kwame's chin, forcing his face toward the big house. "Beg his forgiveness for wasting his valuable time." Kwame's swollen lips moved, trying to form words, but only a wet cough emerged. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. "Worthless!" Brant spat on the ground. He drew his pistol from its holster, the metal gleaming in the morning light. Some lessons need to be permanent. The gunshot cracked like thunder. Kwame's small body jerked once, then went still. Silence fell over the plantation, broken only by the soft thud of the boy's head hitting the dirt. Horace Whitlock cleared his throat from the porch. "Back to work," he called out mildly, as if commenting on the weather. "We've lost enough time today." The crowd dispersed slowly, heads bowed, shoulders hunched against the weight of what they'd witnessed. Abeni stood rooted to the spot, her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. "Move along," Brant ordered, holstering his pistol. His boots left bloody prints in the dirt as he returned to his horse. The day passed in a haze of mechanical movement. Cut, strip, bundle. Each slice of the cane knife felt like a wound in Abeni's own flesh. The sun tracked across the sky, indifferent to the morning's horror. When night finally came, Abeni slipped away from the quarters. She found Kwame's body where they had left it, dumped behind the tool shed like discarded waste. Someone had placed a ragged blanket over him, a small act of dignity in death that had been denied in life. Abeni knelt beside him, finally allowing her tears to fall. She pulled back the blanket, touching his cold cheek with trembling fingers. His face, normally so bright with curiosity, was now frozen in an expression of final terror. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you." Something hard pressed against her knee. Reaching under the blanket, she found Kwame's primer book, the small collection of pages where she had helped him practice his letters. The paper was spattered with his blood. Rage rose in her chest, hot and choking. For years, she had survived by keeping her head down, by finding small ways to resist that wouldn't draw attention. But as she knelt beside Kwame's broken body, something inside her shattered. Back in the kitchen where she sometimes worked, Abeni found the sharpening stone. Her movements were methodical as she drew the kitchen knife across its surface. Each scrape of metal on stone felt like a promise. Candlelight danced across polished silverware as laughter echoed through the Whitlock Manor's dining room. The air was thick with the smell of roasted meat and expensive tobacco. Neighboring planters sat around the long oak table, their faces flushed with wine and self-importance. Abeni moved silently between the guests, a crystal decanter balanced carefully in her hands. Her face remained carefully blank, a mask worn from years of practice. Inside, her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands stayed steady as she poured deep red wine into waiting glasses. "More wine, Brant?" Horace Whitlock called from the head of the table. "You seem rather parched tonight." "Don't mind if I do," Brant replied, holding up his glass. His face was already ruddy from drinking. Abeni approached, the decanter tilted just so. This wine came from a special bottle she had prepared earlier, stored separately in the kitchen. As she poured, she counted each second, making sure to keep her breathing even. "Girl!" Brant snapped his fingers at her. "Make sure it's full to the brim. None of that half-measure nonsense." "Yes, sir," Abeni murmured, continuing to pour until the dark liquid nearly spilled over the rim. Her fingers brushed against the small pouch hidden in the folds of her dress. Empty now, its contents already mixed with the wine. Through the dining room windows, she could see the darkness beyond. Out there, hidden in the shadows of the cane fields, others waited for her signal. The knife tucked into her waistband pressed against her skin, a constant reminder of what was to come. "A toast!" one of the planters declared, raising his glass. "To prosperity and order." "To prosperity and order," the room echoed. Brant drained half his glass in one swallow. Abeni retreated to the kitchen, where other house slaves worked frantically to keep up with the demands of the feast. Malaika, an older woman who had served in the house for decades, gave her a knowing look. They had all played their parts, slipping messages, gathering weapons, preparing for this night. "It's done?" Malaika whispered as she arranged dessert plates. Abeni nodded once, then moved to the window. She picked up a lantern, adjusting its flame as if checking the oil. 3 quick flashes, their signal that the first part of the plan was in motion. Back in the dining room, conversations continued, punctuated by the clink of silver on china. Abeni counted the minutes in her head as she cleared empty plates. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3. Brant's fork clattered to the floor. His face had gone pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "Are you quite all right, Brant?" Whitlock asked, frowning. Brant opened his mouth to respond, but only a choking sound emerged. His hands clutched at his throat as he stumbled to his feet, knocking over his chair. White foam appeared at the corners of his mouth. "Good God!" someone shouted. "What's happening to him?" The overseer's eyes bulged as he staggered, crashing into the table. Wine glasses toppled, spreading red stains across the white tablecloth like blooming blood. His gaze found Abeni's, and in that moment, recognition flickered across his face. Then the first screams came from outside. Orange light flared beyond the windows as flames erupted in the cane fields. The dry stalks caught quickly, fire spreading in waves across the plantation. Black smoke began to curl against the night sky. "Fire!" A servant burst through the doors. "The fields are burning!" Chaos erupted in the dining room. Planters leaped to their feet, shouting orders and questions. Brant collapsed to the floor, his body convulsing, forgotten in the sudden panic. That's when the doors burst open again. This time, it was no servant bringing news. Men and women Abeni had known all her life poured into the room, armed with cane knives, stolen tools, and burning rage. Their eyes gleamed in the candlelight, reflecting years of stored hatred finally unleashed. "What is the meaning of—" Whitlock began, but his words cut off as he saw the weapons in their hands. The knife slipped from Abeni's waistband into her palm, its weight familiar after nights of practice. Around her, the carefully maintained order of the dining room dissolved into violence. China shattered. Wood splintered. Screams mixed with the roar of the spreading fire outside. She watched as Whitlock tried to flee toward his study, only to find his path blocked by armed field hands. The proud master's face contorted with fear as he realized power had shifted like quicksand beneath his feet. Through the windows, more fires bloomed across the plantation. The slave quarters, usually dark and quiet at this hour, came alive with movement as people emerged, carrying torches and makeshift weapons. The flame of rebellion, so long kept carefully hidden, now burned bright and unstoppable. Malaika appeared at Abeni's side, pressing a torch into her free hand. "The storage house is next," she whispered. "Everything burns tonight." Abeni gripped her knife tighter, feeling the weight of all the years of pain, all the deaths like Kwame's, all the countless indignities large and small. She looked at the chaos around her, the overturned table, the spreading wine stains, the body of Brant growing cold on the floor, and felt no remorse. "Tonight," she whispered to herself, the knife steady in her hand, "chains break." The dining room erupted into pure chaos as more rebels poured through every entrance. The polished floors grew slick with spilled wine and blood. Fine china shattered beneath stamping feet as the enslaved turned their master's own table into a battlefield. Abeni moved through the mayhem with deadly purpose, her knife finding targets with precision born from years of contained rage. Around her, others fought with whatever weapons they had, serving forks, fireplace pokers, kitchen knives, and farm tools that had been secretly gathered over weeks of planning. "Find Whitlock!" she shouted above the din. "Don't let him escape!" But the master had already slipped away in the confusion, leaving his guests to face the fury of those they had oppressed. Some planters tried to fight back with dueling pistols and walking canes. Others begged for mercy, their earlier arrogance crumbling in the face of revolution. Through the windows, Abeni watched the fire spread like a living thing. The flames devoured the dry cane fields, creating a wall of orange light that turned night into day. Black smoke billowed upward, carrying sparks that ignited new blazes across the plantation. Malaika appeared at her side, face streaked with soot. "The storage houses are burning. We've opened the smokehouses and grain stores. Everyone who was still locked up is being freed." More shouts erupted from outside as rebels broke into the plantation's weapons storage. Rifles and ammunition, usually kept under strict lock and key, were distributed among the fighters. The sound of gunfire joined the crackling flames and screams of battle. "The overseer's quarters!" someone yelled. "Burn them all!" Abeni ran outside, torch still in hand. The night air was thick with smoke and the metallic smell of blood. Everywhere she looked, buildings blazed, the kitchen house, the barn, the cotton gin. Years of carefully maintained order dissolved in flames. She saw Oba, an elderly man who had spent decades in the fields, standing over the body of one of Brant's junior overseers. His hands shook on the handle of a blood-stained shovel, but his eyes were clear and fierce. "Never again," he whispered as she passed. "Never again will they whip my grandchildren." Near the slave quarters, Adisa, a young mother, was distributing pieces of bread and dried meat from the plundered storehouse. Children huddled around her, some crying, others watching the fires with wide eyes. The little ones who had never known anything but chains now witnessed their world transforming in flame and violence. "Get everyone who can't fight into the woods," Abeni ordered. "There's a clearing past the creek where they'll be safe." The hours blurred together in a haze of fire and combat. More buildings fell. More bodies cooled on the ground. Overseers, house servants, field hands, planters. The distinction between master and slave, written in blood and ash. As dawn approached, the fighting began to slow. The plantation that had stood as a symbol of oppression for generations now lay in smoldering ruins. Smoke hung thick in the air, making every breath taste of destruction. Survivors gathered in the yard between the burned-out hulk of the main house and the destroyed fields. Some laughed and embraced, drunk on victory and newfound freedom. Others wept, overwhelmed by the night's violence and the uncertain future ahead. "We did it," Malaika said, her voice hoarse from smoke. "We actually did it." Abeni nodded, but something kept her from joining the celebration. Years of caution wouldn't let her believe victory could come so easily. She sent runners to scout the neighboring plantations, knowing their success would not go unanswered. The sun rose blood-red through the smoke, casting an eerie light over the devastation. Bodies were gathered for burial. Their dead would be honored, while the masters were left for the crows. The wounded were tended with supplies taken from the house's medical stores. Some began talking of plans, where to go, how to live as free people. Others started salvaging what they could from the ruins, knowing they would need supplies for whatever came next. The initial shock of liberation began to give way to practical concerns of survival. Then the scouts returned, running hard through the charred fields. Their faces told the story before they could speak. "Militias," the first scout gasped, bending over to catch his breath. "At least 3 plantations worth of men. They're gathering at the crossroads, armed with rifles and horses." "How many?" Abeni demanded. 50, maybe more. And they've sent riders to other plantations. More will come. The news spread quickly through the survivors, turning celebration to fear. Those who had thought themselves finally free now realized their fight was just beginning. "What do we do?" Adisa asked, clutching her children closer. Abeni looked at the faces around her, men and women who had just tasted freedom, who had risked everything for this moment. She saw their terror, but also their determination. They had proven they could fight. They had proven they could win. "We prepare," she said firmly. "Get everyone who can't fight deeper into the woods. Gather all the weapons and ammunition you can find. We'll need food, water, medical supplies." The group dispersed quickly, purpose replacing panic. They had destroyed one plantation. They could face whatever came next. Abeni walked to the edge of the ruined cane fields, her clothes still stained with ash and blood from the night's battle. The morning air was heavy with smoke, but she could hear it clearly, the distant thunder of approaching hoofbeats, the rhythmic beat of war drums carried on the wind. She stood there, watching the horizon where their enemies would appear, knowing that their brief taste of victory was only the beginning of a much longer, bloodier struggle. The knife in her hand felt heavier now, weighted with the responsibility of leading her people through whatever came next. Dawn broke over the ruins of the Whitlock plantation, casting long shadows through the smoke that still lingered in the air. In the charred remains of the slave quarters, survivors huddled together, their faces marked with exhaustion and uncertainty. The initial euphoria of victory had faded, replaced by the grim reality of their situation. Abeni stood before them, her own weariness hidden behind a mask of determination. She had never wanted to be a leader, but now dozens of eyes turned to her, seeking direction, hoping for salvation. "The militia will come from the North Road," she said, pointing toward the distant tree line. "They'll expect us to run, to scatter into the swamps like frightened rabbits." "Maybe we should," Josiah spoke up. He was an older man, his face weathered by decades in the fields. "Better to live free in the swamps than die here." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Fear was a tangible presence, thick as the smoke in their lungs. "The swamps will kill us as surely as the militia," Malaika countered, stepping forward to stand beside Abeni. "We have children, elderly, wounded. How long before fever takes them? Or hunger? And they'll hunt us down one by one," Abeni added. "Together, we took this plantation. Together, we can defend it." But doubt showed on many faces. They had weapons now, rifles and ammunition taken from the overseer's quarters, but few knew how to use them properly. Their victory had been won through surprise and desperate courage. The militia would bring trained men, horses, and proper military tactics. "I've seen the swamps swallow whole hunting parties," Kofi said. He was one of the younger men, strong from years of field work. "We know those waters better than any militia man." "We could survive?" "Survive?" Abeni's voice cut through the worried chatter. "Is that all we're fighting for now? To survive? We didn't rise up just to hide in the mud like animals." She moved through the crowd, meeting their eyes one by one. "Last night, we proved we're not slaves anymore. We're warriors. We're free people. And free people defend what's theirs." Adisa, still cradling her youngest child, spoke softly. What's your plan then? How do we fight an army? Abeni had spent the pre-dawn hours studying the plantation's layout, marking every advantage they could use. We have what they don't: knowledge of this land, every ditch, every hollow, every hidden path. We'll use that. She knelt and began drawing in the dirt with a stick, just as she had once used to teach children their letters. The North Road runs through thick woods before opening onto the fields. We'll dig trenches here and here, cover them with branches. Their horses will break legs. More people gathered around, studying her rough map. She continued, "We'll set sharp stakes in the ground, hidden in the tall grass. Build barriers to force them where we want them to go." "And then what?" someone asked. "Then we show them what free people can do," Abeni replied. "We have rifles, high ground from the barn ruins, cover in the burned cane fields. Let them come thinking we're weak. Let them learn different." The plan began to take shape. Strong hands that had spent lifetimes building their master's fortune now worked to fortify their own position. They gathered tools, weapons, and supplies. Young men who had learned to shoot by watching the overseers practice now took up rifles with grim determination. Some still argued for flight, but Abeni's words had kindled something stronger than fear. They had tasted freedom, felt its power. The thought of slinking away into the swamps now felt like putting the chains back on themselves. "We'll need water," she instructed. "Food, medical supplies, everything you can salvage from the big house. And we need to get the children and those who can't fight to safety." Adisa organized a group to create a hidden camp deep in the woods, where the most vulnerable could shelter. Others began digging trenches along the North Road, carefully disguising them with branches and leaves. The work was backbreaking, but no one complained. They had endured worse for their master's profit. As the sun climbed higher, Abeni moved between the groups, offering encouragement, adjusting plans, solving problems. She showed them how to set sharp stakes at angles that would catch charging horses, how to build barriers that would funnel the militia into killing zones. Every skill she had learned through years of careful observation now served their survival. Kofi, who had argued for the swamps, proved to be one of the best marksmen. She set him to teaching others how to shoot, using fence posts as targets. The crack of rifle fire echoed across the plantation as former field hands learned to be soldiers. Malaika organized the medical supplies, teaching basic wound care to those who would serve as nurses. They had no doctor, but generations of treating their own injuries had taught them much about healing. By late afternoon, the plantation had been transformed into a fortress. Trenches and barriers turned the once open fields into a deadly maze. Sharpshooters were positioned in the ruins of the barn and stable, with clear views of any approaching force. Teams were organized, assignments given, plans memorized. As dusk approached, Abeni walked the perimeter one final time, checking defenses, encouraging the nervous sentries. The sun set blood-red through the lingering smoke, casting everything in crimson shadows. She stood at the edge of the north field, where freshly dug trenches waited like open graves. In the growing darkness, she could see them. Pinpoints of light moving through the trees, lanterns carried by militiamen drawing steadily closer. Malaika appeared at her side, rifle cradled in arms that had previously only known field work and house chores. "They're coming," she whispered. "Yes," Abeni replied, watching the distant lights. "Let them come." Around her, free men and women moved quietly to their positions, weapons ready, hearts pounding, but spirits unbroken. They had built their master's world once. Now they would defend their own. Gray mist clung to the earth like a burial shroud, turning the world into shifting shadows. Abeni crouched in the tall reeds at the swamp's edge, 20 of her best fighters hidden nearby. The sweet rot of marsh water filled her nostrils, mixing with the metallic scent of the weapons they carried. "Remember," she whispered to those closest, "wait for my signal." Let them get deep into the trap first. They had spent hours preparing this stretch of ground. What looked like solid earth was actually a series of carefully disguised mud pits, each studded with sharpened stakes pointing upward. The morning fog would hide the disturbed ground until it was too late. Malika touched Abeni's arm and pointed. Through the mist, they could hear the approaching militia. Horses' hooves squelching in the wet ground, men's voices carrying across the still air. The rebels pressed themselves lower, barely breathing. The first riders appeared like ghosts through the fog. Their horses moved cautiously, sensing something wrong in the uncertain footing. Abeni counted them, 12 men in the lead group, armed with rifles and pistols. Behind them, she could hear more approaching. "Steady," she mouthed to her people. The trap needed to catch as many as possible. The lead rider, a broad-shouldered man in a fine coat, raised his hand to halt the column. "Ground's not right here," he called back. "Too soft." "It's all soft, you fool," another voice answered. "It's swampland. Keep moving. They can't have gone far." Abeni allowed herself a small smile. The militia's contempt would be their undoing. They thought they were hunting frightened runaways, not warriors lying in wait. The column pressed forward. When the lead rider's horse stepped into the first hidden pit, the animal's scream split the morning air. The horse pitched forward, impaling itself on the stakes. Its rider flew over its head, landing hard in the mud. "Now!" Abeni shouted. The rebels rose from the reeds like avenging spirits, rifles cracking. 3 militiamen fell before they could even draw their weapons. Horses reared and thrashed, throwing more riders. The carefully prepared ground turned the orderly column into chaos. "Ambush!" someone screamed. "Fall back." But there was nowhere to fall back to. More horses stumbled into the hidden pits. Men trying to retreat found themselves mired in deep mud that sucked at their boots. The rebels fired again and again, the shots echoing across the swamp. Abeni led a charge from the reeds, machete in hand. She reached the first fallen rider as he struggled to rise from the mud. Their eyes met for a moment. She recognized him as one of the overseers from the neighboring Sullivan Plantation. Then her blade fell. The fighting was brutal and close. Rifles became clubs once fired. Knives flashed in the gray morning light. The rebels fought with the fury of people who had nothing left to lose, while the militiamen found their training meant little in this treacherous ground. "Push them back," Abeni shouted. "Drive them into the deep mud," her people responded, pressing forward with savage determination. The surviving militiamen tried to retreat, but their horses could barely move in the swamp mud. One by one, they fell. The fog began to lift, revealing the full extent of the carnage. Dead horses and men lay scattered across the killing ground. The mud was stained red. Of the militia's first wave, only 3 remained alive, 2 wounded, and 1 who had surrendered after his horse was killed. "Search them for weapons and ammunition," Abeni ordered. "Anything we can use." Her people moved among the dead with practiced efficiency, collecting rifles, pistols, and powder. Even the horse's tack would be useful. Leather could be turned into all manner of necessary things. Malika approached, wiping blood from her knife. 8 rifles, 4 pistols, and enough ammunition to make it worth the fight. Plus whatever's still usable on the dead ones. "And our losses?" 2 wounded, none dead. Femi took a bullet in the arm, but it's clean through. Hannah's already treating him. Abeni nodded, relief mixing with pride. Their preparations had paid off. The militia had expected to hunt down frightened slaves. Instead, they'd been the ones slaughtered. Kofi dragged the surviving prisoner forward and forced him to his knees. Abeni recognized him, Gregory Miller, an overseer known for his cruelty. His fine coat was now caked with mud and blood. "Please," Miller begged, his earlier arrogance gone. "I have a family. Children. Show mercy." "Mercy!" Kofi spat. Like the mercy you showed my brother when you whipped him to death? Kill him, Malaika urged. He'll only bring more trouble if we let him live. Abeni studied Miller's face. Fear had stripped away his mask of authority, revealing the coward beneath. She thought of Kwame, of countless others who had died under the overseer's whips. Her hand tightened on her machete, but something held her back. Perhaps it was the memory of her own humanity, which she feared losing in this war. Or maybe it was the thought that showing mercy might prove they were better than their former masters. "Let him go," she ordered. "What?" Kofi stared at her in disbelief. "After everything they've done?" "We're not them," Abeni said firmly. "We won't kill unarmed men begging for mercy. Take him to the North Road and release him." Malaika grabbed her arm. "Abeni, this is a mistake. He'll tell them everything he's seen. Our defenses, our numbers. Let him tell them," Abeni replied. "Let them know we could have killed him, but chose not to. Let them wonder why." Two rebels led Miller away, but not before Abeni caught the look in his eyes. Behind the fear and relief, something darker lurked, a gleam of malice that made her question her decision. Yet she stood firm as they led him away, watching until he disappeared into the remaining wisps of fog. The evening sun painted long shadows across the rebel camp. Cooking fires dotted the clearing where they had made their temporary home, the smell of cornmeal mush mixing with wood smoke. Children darted between the shelters, their laughter a precious sound that made Abeni's heart ache with both joy and worry. She sat on an overturned barrel, watching Malaika stir a large pot of the stolen cornmeal. They had raided 3 plantation storehouses in the days since the swamp ambush, gathering enough food to feed their growing numbers. More escaped slaves found their way to them each day, drawn by whispered stories of freedom fighters in the swamps. "At least they won't go hungry tonight," Malaika said, ladling portions into wooden bowls. A line of children waited eagerly, squirming with impatience. "Careful now," Abeni told them, managing a smile. "Don't spill a drop. Food's too precious to waste." Little Abena, no more than 6, clutched her bowl close to her chest. "It's better than what we got at Master Wilson's place," she declared, "and nobody hits us for asking for more." The simple truth in those words made Abeni's throat tight. She watched the girls skip away to join the other children sitting cross-legged near the fire. They spooned up their food with the serious concentration of those who had known real hunger. Kofi approached, his wounded arm now healing in a sling. The lookouts report all quiet on the north side. No sign of militia movement since yesterday. "And the south?" Abeni asked. "Clear, too. Maybe they've given up trying to find us in these swamps." But something felt wrong. The hairs on the back of Abeni's neck prickled. The victory at the swamp had been too easy. The days since too peaceful. She stood, scanning the deepening shadows between the trees. "Double the watch tonight," she ordered. "Something doesn't feel right." Kofi nodded, and turned to relay the order. He had taken 3 steps when the first shot cracked through the evening calm. One of the lookouts fell from his perch in a cypress tree, dead before he hit the ground. Then the night exploded with gunfire and screaming. "Raiders!" Abeni shouted. "Get the children to the—" More shots cut through her words. Soldiers emerged from the darkness, far too many, their uniforms marking them as regular army rather than militia. They had surrounded the camp completely, moving with practiced precision that spoke of careful planning. And at their head, wearing a cruel smile, rode Gregory Miller, the overseer she had spared. "Take them alive!" Miller shouted. "The bounty's better that way!" Abeni's people scrambled for weapons, but the attack had caught them at supper, scattered and unprepared. A soldier grabbed little Abena, yanking the bowl from her hands. The girl screamed as he threw her toward a waiting cart. "No!" Malaika charged the man with a kitchen knife. His rifle butt caught her in the temple, dropping her to the ground. Abeni snatched up her machete and rallied those nearest her. "Fight! Don't let them take the children!" They fought desperately in the fading light, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. For every soldier they struck down, 3 more appeared. The army had clearly been watching, waiting for this moment when their guard was lowest. Miller rode through the chaos, directing soldiers with practiced ease. "Remember, the woman Abeni is worth extra. The master wants her alive." A bullet whined past Abeni's ear. She ducked behind a water barrel, watching helplessly as soldiers dragged her people away. Some fought, others simply wept as chains were locked around their wrists. The children's screams cut her deeper than any blade. Kofi appeared at her side, pressing a pistol into her hand. "We have to run," he hissed. "We can't help them if we're dead or captured." She wanted to argue, to fight until her last breath. But she saw the truth in his words. They needed survivors to tell this story, to keep fighting. "This way," she whispered, leading a small group toward a hidden path through the cypress trees. They had prepared escape routes, never truly believing they'd need them. Behind them, Miller's voice rang out. "Find her! Don't let that black witch escape!" They ran through darkness, splashing through shallow water and stumbling over cypress knees. Branches whipped at their faces. Someone in their group sobbed quietly as they fled. A shout went up. They'd been spotted. Bullets splintered tree bark around them. Abeni felt a burning across her arm as one shot found its mark, but she kept running. The sounds of pursuit grew closer. Her lungs burned. The wound in her arm left a trail of blood that would be easy to follow. "Split up!" she gasped to the others. "Make for the meeting place!" Their small group scattered into the swamp. Abeni turned east, toward deeper water where horses couldn't follow. She heard splashing behind her. At least 2 soldiers on foot had stayed with her trail. Her foot caught on a submerged root. She pitched forward, landing hard in shallow water and mud. The pistol Kofi had given her slipped from her grasp, disappearing into the murk. Rolling onto her back, she saw torchlight approaching through the trees. The flames reflected off the water, creating a hellish scene. Somewhere in the distance, she could still hear screaming from the camp. More shots echoed through the swamp, but farther away now. She hoped that meant some of her people had escaped. The thought of Malaika, of the children, of all those recaptured, made her want to howl with rage and grief. Smoke rose above the cypress trees, black against the last light of dusk. They were burning the camp, destroying everything her people had built. The soldiers would erase all trace that slaves had dared to live free, even for a few precious days. Abeni lay in the mud, her body trembling with exhaustion and loss. The screams from the camp seemed to echo endlessly in her mind, a chorus of failure that threatened to drive her mad. She had led her people to this. She had shown mercy to Miller, and he had repaid that mercy with betrayal. The torchlight grew closer. She forced herself to move, to crawl deeper into the swamp's embrace. She couldn't be captured, not while any of her people remained in chains. Around her, the night swallowed her people's screams, leaving only the sound of flame and troubled water. The dawn light filtered through Spanish moss as Abeni huddled beneath a fallen cypress. 2 days had passed since the raid that shattered their camp. Her arm throbbed where the bullet had grazed her, the wound crudely bandaged with a strip torn from her skirt. Hunger gnawed at her sobak. She'd had nothing but swamp water and a handful of wild berries since fleeing. A twig snapped nearby. She gripped her machete, ready to fight, but relaxed when Kofi's familiar whistle cut through the morning mist. He emerged from the trees with 3 others, Kwabena, Josiah, and Nia. All looked as ragged as she felt. "We found more," Kofi said softly. 7 hiding in an abandoned sugar shack 2 miles south. Hannah's with them. Abeni's heart lifted slightly at the news. Hannah was their best healer. They desperately needed her skills. "Any word of the others?" Josiah shook his head grimly. "Most got taken back to the plantations. Some. His voice cracked. Some didn't make it. Nia sat heavily on a tree root, her face hollow with exhaustion. Malika's badly injured. She fought them when they tried to take her daughter. She couldn't finish. Abeni closed her eyes, grief and rage warring in her chest. Malaika had been with her since the beginning, one of the first to join the revolt. Her cornbread had fed their souls as much as their bodies. "We need weapons," Kwabena said, breaking the heavy silence. "Real ones, not just knives and farm tools. The militia's too strong otherwise." Kofi nodded. "I heard talk in town yesterday, disguised as a free man running errands. Big shipment of muskets coming through Obayoro, headed to reinforce the plantation militias." Abeni's eyes snapped open. "Where?" "River Road, near the old chapel. 20 muskets, powder, shot. Everything we'd need." "But they'll have guards, Abeni. Strong ones." She pushed herself up, ignoring the protest from her wounded arm. "How many guards?" 6 men on horseback, plus the wagon driver." Josiah frowned. 7 against how many of us? Even with Hannah's group, we're only 12, and half are too weak to fight." "Numbers aren't everything," Abeni said, her mind already working. "The river road has that sharp bend by the chapel. Narrow, with thick woods on both sides." She began sketching in the dirt with a stick, marking positions. The others gathered around, watching as her plan took shape. It was desperate, but they had nothing left to lose. The next day found them positioned along the river road, hidden in the dense undergrowth. Abeni's stomach cramped with hunger, but she forced herself to focus. They could hear the wagon approaching, wheels creaking on the packed earth. Hannah had treated their wounds as best she could with foraged herbs and stolen whiskey. Now she waited with the others too weak to fight, ready to help if things went wrong. They needed this victory, not just for the weapons, but for hope itself. The wagon appeared around the bend, flanked by mounted guards in militia uniforms. Abeni held her breath, counting the seconds. The front wheels hit the spot she'd marked in her mind. "Now!" she shouted. Kwabena and Josiah heaved on the rope they'd stretched across the road. It snapped up, catching the horses' legs. The animals went down hard, throwing their riders. The wagon lurched to a stop. Before the guards could recover, Abeni's people burst from the trees with wild cries. They'd smeared mud on their faces and clothes, looking like demons rising from the swamp. The psychological effect was devastating. Several guards tried to flee immediately. Kofi's group attacked from the other side, hurling stones and branches to create chaos. In the confusion, no one noticed Nia sneaking up to the wagon until she'd already snatched the first musket. "Shoot them!" the lead guard shouted, raising his pistol. Abeni's machete found his gun hand before he could fire. He screamed, weapon dropping to the dirt. The fight was brutal, but brief. 2 guards died, 1 fled, and the rest surrendered. They tied them up with their own horses' reins, leaving them far enough from town to give the rebels time to escape. 23 muskets, Nia announced, counting their prize, plus powder, shot, and 3 pistols. She was grinning despite a fresh cut on her cheek. They distributed the weapons quickly, those who'd served in their master's militias, showing others how to load and aim. Abeni hefted one of the muskets, feeling its solid weight. This was power. Real power. Not just the desperate strength of kitchen knives and farming tools. The group gathered in a clearing to inventory their prize. Even the wounded sat up straighter, eyes bright with renewed purpose. Someone started singing an old spiritual, others joining in. The sound swelled through the trees, not fearful whispers now, but strong voices raised in triumph. "To freedom!" Kofi shouted, raising his musket to the sky. Others followed suit, their new weapons gleaming in the afternoon sun. "To freedom!" they echoed. Even Hannah's group of wounded joined the cry. Abeni gripped her musket tighter, allowing herself to feel a flicker of hope. With these weapons, they could defend themselves properly. maybe even launch raids to free more of their people. They weren't just running and hiding anymore. They could fight back on equal terms. The celebration continued around her. Quabena was showing the younger ones how to check their powder stayed dry. Josiah and Nia sorted ammunition. Hannah spoke of using the wagon to transport their wounded to a safer camp. Then Kofi grabbed her arm, pointing. Her eyes followed his gesture to the horizon, where a column of dark smoke rose above the trees. The familiar sight made her blood run cold. Another raid was coming. The musket felt heavier in her hands as she watched that ominous smoke climb higher into the clear afternoon sky. Twilight crept through the trees as Abeni helped fortify their hasty camp. The joy of their victory had faded quickly when scouts reported militia forces approaching from 3 directions. They'd barely had time to dig basic defenses and position shooters behind fallen logs. The first gunshot shattered the evening calm. A rebel sentry fell backward, crimson blooming across his chest. Then the night exploded into chaos. "They're coming from all sides!" Kofi shouted, firing his newly acquired musket into the darkness. Muzzle flashes lit up the trees like lightning strikes. Abeni crouched behind a log barricade, struggling to reload in the fading light. Her hands shook as she rammed the powder home. They had weapons now, but too little training with them. Many shots went wild, wasting precious ammunition. The militia attacked in waves, their experience showing. They moved like a practiced unit, advancing between shots, taking cover. The rebels fought desperately, but couldn't match their discipline. "Hannah, get the children to the wagon!" Abeni screamed over the gunfire. She saw Hannah herding several young ones toward their escape route, but militia riders had already circled behind them. "Please! They're just children!" Hannah's plea ended in a terrible scream as cavalry troops charged through their ranks. Chains rattled in the darkness as soldiers began shackling survivors. Nia fell next to Abeni, shot through the shoulder. "Run!" she gasped. "You have to survive. Tell our story." Blood bubbled from her lips as she pressed something into Abeni's hands. Kwame's primer book, somehow saved through all their trials. "I won't leave you," Abeni insisted, trying to drag her friend to safety. But Nia was already gone, her eyes fixed on the smoke-filled sky. Josiah died defending the wagon, taking 3 soldiers with him before they cut him down. Quabena was captured trying to save a group of elders. Kofi vanished in the chaos. Dead or taken, Abeni couldn't tell through the gun smoke and shadows. She fought until her musket jammed, then used it as a club until it splintered. When soldiers closed in, she slashed with her machete, opening throats and arms. But there were too many. Always too many. Fire spread through their camp as soldiers torched their supplies. The heat drove Abeni back, forcing her deeper into the woods. She saw familiar faces in chains, people she'd led, people who'd trusted her. Children wailing for parents, elders stumbling under soldiers' blows. An officer grabbed her arm. She spun, machete flashing, and felt it bite flesh. He fell back, cursing, giving her the moment she needed. She plunged into the underbrush, thorns tearing at her clothes and skin. Bullets whizzed past as she ran. One creased her thigh, leaving a line of fire. She stumbled but kept moving, clutching Kwame's primer to her chest. Behind her, she heard horses crashing through the brush. But the swamp was her ally now. She knew paths they didn't, places where horses couldn't follow. She splashed through shallow water, hoping it would hide her trail. The sounds of pursuit gradually faded, replaced by the normal chorus of swamp night. Frogs, insects, the occasional splash of something sliding into deeper water. Still, she ran. Her lungs burned. Her wounded leg threatened to collapse. But she couldn't stop, not while the screams of her people echoed in her mind, not while the image of Nia's dead eyes haunted her. Finally, when she could run no more, Abeni collapsed against a cypress tree. The rough bark scraped her back as she slid down, legs giving out at last. Above, stars peeked through the canopy, cold and distant as God's eyes. Her whole body shook with exhaustion and grief. The primer book was still clutched to her chest, its pages damp with sweat and blood. She opened it carefully, touching the crude letters she'd helped Kwame practice. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the book, to Kwame's memory, to all those she'd failed to protect. "I'm so sorry." Tears came then, hot and bitter. She wept for Nia's sacrifice, for Josiah's bravery, for Hannah's captured children, for all the dreams of freedom burned to ash in that night's defeat. The primer's pages rattled as her shoulders shook with sobs. This small book, contraband that could have meant death if discovered, represented everything they'd fought for. The right to read, to learn, to be human in a system that denied their humanity. Kwame had been so proud when he first recognized his name written in the dirt. His eyes had lit up with the pure joy of discovery. That light had died under Overseer Brandt's whip, just as tonight's hope had died under militia guns. Abeni clutched the book tighter, her tears slowly changing to something harder. Rage crystallized in her chest, cold and sharp as winter ice. They could take her people, burn her camp, destroy everything she'd built, but they couldn't take her will to fight. She pressed the primer to her forehead like a prayer book. "I swear by your memory, Kwame, by Nia's blood, by every chain they've wrapped around our children. I'll make them pay. One last time, I'll make them pay." The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to her pain. Somewhere in the darkness, her captured people were being marched back to bondage. But Abeni remained motionless, letting her grief harden into purpose. Her fingers traced the book's worn cover as she planned her final revenge. The darkness before dawn wrapped around Abeni like a burial shroud as she huddled beneath a massive cypress. Her wounds from the night's escape had stiffened, making every movement a battle against pain. But pain was an old friend now. She'd learned to use it, to let it fuel her resolve. 3 figures materialized from the swamp shadows, all that remained of her loyal fighters. Namdi limped heavily, fresh blood darkening his pants leg. Malaika's face was streaked with soot and tears, but her eyes burned fierce. Adeyemi, the oldest among them, carried himself like a man already dead, yet his grip on his stolen musket never wavered. They gathered without speaking, forming a tight circle in the gloom. The weight of their losses pressed down like chains. Abeni could read the questions in their exhausted faces. What now? Where do we run? How do we survive? She pulled Kwame's primer from her shirt, holding it so they could see. The book's pages were warped with moisture, spotted with blood, but still intact. Like them. Damaged, but not destroyed. "We've lost everything," Abeni said softly, her voice rough from smoke and screaming. "Our people. Our weapons. Our chance at lasting freedom." She touched the primer's cover gently. "But we still have this. The proof that we learned what they never wanted us to know. The proof that we dared to be more than property." Namdi shifted, wincing. "They'll hunt us down eventually. Nowhere left to hide. Then we don't hide." Abeni's words cut through the pre-dawn stillness. "We strike. One last time?" Malaika leaned forward, her chains of matted hair clicking softly. "Strike where? We've got no guns, no numbers. Just us 4 against an army. The sugar mill." Abeni saw recognition flash in their eyes. The massive building had been the heart of Whitlock's empire, where countless slaves had died feeding the grinding wheels and boiling vats. Now the militia used it as their command post and supply depot. "That's suicide," Adeyemi said quietly. It wasn't a protest, just a statement of fact. Abeni nodded. "Yes, but think what it would mean. That mill feeds half the plantations in 3 parishes. Without it, their whole system breaks down. The crop rots in the fields. The profits dry up. And every slave who sees it burn will know. We weren't powerless. We chose our ending. Silence fell as her words sank in. The swamp breathed around them. Cricket song, the splash of unseen creatures, wind through Spanish moss. The same sounds their ancestors had heard, generation after generation, in bondage. Nanamdi was the first to speak. How would we do it? I worked those kettles 15 years, Abeni said. I know every corner, every shadow. The militia won't expect anyone to attack. They think they broke us last night. We go in quiet, set the fires right, and the whole place goes up like dry kindling. Malaika's fingers traced old burn scars on her arms, memories of the dangerous work around the boiling cane juice. The roof beams are soaked with years of sugar dust. One spark, and she made a soft, exploding sound. They'll kill us, Adeyemi said. Again, not a protest, just truth. They've been killing us our whole lives, Abeni replied. Slow or fast, it's all the same death. But this way, we choose. This way, we leave a scar they can't ignore. She opened the primer, its pages glowing faintly in the growing dawn light. Kwame died learning these letters. Nia died protecting this book. How many others died never knowing a single word, never having a single choice? Her voice hardened. I say we write our names in fire. Let them read that. One by one, her companions nodded. What was left to lose? They were already ghosts, already mourning themselves. When? Namdi asked. Tonight. They'll be celebrating their victory, drunk on our misery. We'll make it their last toast. They spent the next hours planning in whispers. Abeni drew diagrams in the dirt. The mill's layout, guard positions, the best places to start the fires. Each of them had worked there. Each knew its vulnerabilities. They gathered what weapons they could, sharp sticks, stones, Namdi's broken knife. As the sky began to lighten, they rose stiffly. No one spoke of survival or escape. This was an ending, and they all knew it. But there was peace in that knowledge, a terrible freedom in having nothing left to lose. Abeni tucked the primer back into her shirt, feeling it press against her heart. She thought of Kwame's smile when he first wrote his name, of Nia's final words, tell our story, of all the unnamed dead whose bones had fed these swamps. Ready? She asked softly. They nodded, faces set with grim purpose. The fog was rolling in thick now, turning the cypresses into looming ghosts, perfect cover for their final march. They moved out in single file, Malaika leading with her hunter's instinct for safe paths. Namdi followed, then Adeyemi, with Abeni bringing up the rear. The mist swallowed them one by one, their dark shapes dissolving like spirits returning to the earth. The swamp seemed to move with them, hiding their passage. Roots rose to guide their feet. Branches bent to mask their silhouettes. The very air thickened around them, as if nature itself conspired to shield these last warriors on their death walk. Their footsteps made no sound on the soft ground. Even their breathing seemed muffled by the fog's embrace. They were shadows now, vengeance given form, their humanity already shed like an outgrown skin. The marsh stretched endless before them, its mists promising concealment for this final journey. Somewhere ahead lay the mill, their destiny, their pyre. But for now, there was only the fog and their silent procession through it. 4 ghosts marching toward an ending of their own choosing. Night crept over the ruins of Whitlock Plantation like a burial shroud. The sugar mill's massive grinding wheels still turned, their endless groaning echoing across the devastated fields. Torchlight flickered from the mill's windows, casting long shadows where militia soldiers patrolled the grounds, rifles gleaming. Abeni and her 3 companions lay belly down in the tall marsh grass, watching. The air was thick with familiar smells, burnt sugar, molasses, and the sickly sweet rot of discarded cane. From their hiding spot, They could see 2 guards at the main door, more on the loading dock, and shadows moving inside. 8 outside, Malaika whispered, her keen hunter's eyes scanning the darkness. Maybe 12 inside, by the lamp count. Namdi shifted, checking the stolen powder charges they'd scavenged from dead soldiers. Enough to start the fire, if we place them right. Remember, Abeni breathed, the dust is everywhere. In the beams, the floors, coating every surface. One good spark will feed the rest. Her fingers traced old scars from sugar burns, remembering the countless times she'd seen the lethal powder ignite. Adeyemi gripped his torch tighter, wrapped in oiled rags ready for lighting. We go in quiet, then. Abeni nodded. Through the grinding room first. They won't hear us over the wheels. She touched each of their shoulders in turn. Whatever happens, make sure the powder reaches the storage rooms. That's where the real fire will start. They began their approach, crawling through shadows cast by the looming building. The mill's bulk blocked the rising moon, leaving them in deeper darkness. Their movements were silent. They'd learned stealth as children, sneaking food and medicine past overseer patrols. The first guard never saw Namdi's knife. He died without a sound, pulled into the grass. Malaika took the second with a garrote made from stripped vine. Adeyemi and Abeni dragged the bodies into the shadows, retrieving their weapons. 2 more knives, a pistol. At the side door, Abeni pressed her ear to the rough wood. The grinding wheels thundered through the walls, masking any voices inside. She eased the door open, its hinges well oiled from years of maintenance. The sound of the machinery grew deafening. They slipped inside like ghosts, keeping to the walls. The grinding room was dimly lit by scattered lanterns, huge wooden wheels turning endlessly, crushing the last of the season's cane. 2 militia men stood on the upper walkway, paying no attention to the shadows below. Malaika and Adeyemi split off first, heading for the storage rooms with their powder charges. Namdi took position near the stairs, ready to prevent any escape once the fires started. Abeni moved deeper into the building's heart, where she'd spent so many years feeding the hungry machines. The main boiling room lay ahead, where massive kettles still bubbled with cooking sugar. Steam filled the air, making it hard to breathe. 3 soldiers lounged near the vats, passing a bottle between them. Their laughter carried over the machinery's roar. Abeni's hand tightened on her knife. She could slit their throats now, start the killing early. But that wasn't the plan. The fire had to come first, had to spread so fast and far that no one could stop it. She crept past them, reaching the far wall where dried sugar dust lay thick on every surface. Her fingers found the familiar cracks between boards, perfect spaces to pack the powder charges. Working silently, she planted them along the wall's length, trailing fuse cord between them. A sudden shout from above made her freeze. On the walkway, a soldier had spotted Malaika, placing her charges. Gunfire erupted, deafening even over the machinery. The plan dissolved into chaos. Abeni struck her flint, touching flame to the nearest fuse. Across the room, the 3 soldiers by the vats were rising, reaching for weapons. She threw her knife, catching one in the throat. Namdi burst through a door behind them, firing the stolen pistol. The first explosion rocked the building's foundations. Flames roared up the wall where Abeni's charges had been placed. Sugar dust ignited instantly, creating a rolling fireball that raced along the ceiling beams. Screaming filled the air as soldiers caught in the blast staggered blindly. Through the smoke, Abeni glimpsed Gregory Miller on the loading dock, his face twisted in terror. The roof screamed as it gave way, and his figure disappeared into the roaring flames. More explosions followed. Malaika and Adeyemi's charges detonating in the storage rooms. The heat became intense, unbearable. Burning sugar filled the air with toxic smoke. Abeni saw Namdi go down under a soldier's blade, but there was no time to mourn. The fire was everything now. She ran through the inferno, setting more charges, spreading the destruction. The grinding wheels seized and stopped as their wooden teeth caught fire. Support beams cracked with cannon-like booms. The roof began to cave in sections, sending burning debris crashing down. Outside, militia reinforcements were arriving, but it was already too late. The fire had spread to the cane fields, racing through the dry stalks. Warehouses full of stored sugar exploded, their contents becoming fuel. The night turned bright as day. Abeni fought her way back through the burning mill, past bodies she couldn't identify. A bullet grazed her shoulder. Another struck her thigh. She kept moving, kept spreading fire. This was her legacy now. Destruction absolute and complete. She emerged onto the loading dock as the mill's central support finally gave way. The entire structure collapsed inward with a roar like thunder. Sparks and burning debris rained down, setting more fires wherever they landed. The heat was so intense it drove back the soldiers trying to contain the blaze. Staggering from her wounds, Abeni climbed to higher ground. Blood soaked her clothes, but she barely felt the pain. All around, her handiwork painted the night in shades of orange and red. The fire had taken on a life of its own, consuming everything in its path. The very air seemed to burn. She stood tall despite her injuries, watching the inferno climb higher into the sky. Flames illuminated her face, reflecting in eyes that held no regret, no fear. Only the satisfaction of seeing her final act of defiance made manifest. The fire cast her shadow huge against the smoke, a giant born of flame and vengeance. For a moment, she was no longer flesh and blood, but something elemental, the embodiment of centuries of rage finally unleashed. The fire roared its approval, reaching toward heaven with burning fingers as if trying to scorch the very stars. Dawn crept across the smoking ruins of Whitlock Plantation, pale light filtering through a haze of ash that still drifted on the morning breeze. Where the mighty sugar mill had stood, only blackened timbers remained, jutting from the scorched earth like broken bones. The entire plantation lay under a blanket of gray. Fields reduced to cinders. Warehouses collapsed into heaps of charred wood and twisted metal. Militia riders approached cautiously through the destruction, their horses nervous in the acrid smoke. They found bodies everywhere. Soldiers, workers, rebels, all equal now in death. The fire had shown no favorites, consuming everything in its path without distinction. Colonel Harrison dismounted, his boots crunching on cooling embers. "Search for survivors," he ordered, though his tone suggested he expected to find none. His men spread out across the devastated grounds, rifles ready despite the desolation. In the surrounding swamps and forests, small groups of rebels melted away like morning mist. They moved in twos and threes, following hidden paths known only to those who'd spent lifetimes working these lands. Some headed north toward promised freedom, others south into deeper wilderness. Each carried the story of the fire, of Abeni's final stand. A young soldier approached the colonel, holding a scorched ledger salvaged from the ruins. "Sir, the financial losses? This will cripple the whole region's sugar trade." Harrison's weathered face tightened. "More than that, boy. This was meant to send a message, one they'll be whispering about for years to come." By midday, more officials arrived. Planters, magistrates, investigators. They picked through the ashes, counting costs, assigning blame. But of Abeni herself, they found no trace. Some claimed to have seen her escape into the swamps. Others swore she'd perished in the flames of her own making. The truth vanished like smoke in the wind. 20 years later, in a hidden cabin deep in Georgia's woods, an old woman named Adisa sat surrounded by children. Their eyes were wide in the firelight as she spoke of events that had become legend. "I was there," she said, her voice soft but clear. I saw the night Abeni burned Whitlock to the ground. We'd all heard stories of revolts before. Nat Turner's rebellion, the Stono uprising. But this was different. This wasn't just about escape or revenge. This was about showing them we could destroy everything they'd built. The children leaned closer as she continued. Some say she died in that fire, consumed by her own vengeance. Others tell of seeing her in Philadelphia, teaching freed children to read just as she once taught young Kwame. There are whispers of her moving west, gathering more followers, burning more plantations. Adisa's gnarled fingers traced patterns in the dirt floor. But where she went doesn't matter as much as what she proved. Every time a master walks through his fields now, he remembers Whitlock. Every time they see smoke on the horizon, they remember how one woman brought down an empire of sugar and pain. But some stories had no ending, like little Abena, taken in the raid. Some whispered she was sold south. Others swore she lived to grow old in freedom. Adisa never knew for certain, and that absence haunted every telling one small girl raised her hand. But wasn't she wrong to kill so many? Adisa's eyes grew distant. Child, when you've worn chains, when you've watched them beat babies for crying too loud, when you've seen friends worked to death in those fields, sometimes fire is the only justice left. Abeni didn't start the violence. She just returned what had been given to us 1,000 times over. The old woman stood slowly, joints creaking. She moved to a shelf and brought down a small wooden box. Inside lay a charred primer book, its pages smoke-stained but still readable. This was Kwame's, she said, the boy whose death sparked it all. Abeni taught him his letters from this very book. Some say she carried it with her that final night, as a reminder of why the fire had to come. Thunder rolled in the distance, and the children huddled closer to the hearth. Adisa's voice grew stronger as she spoke. They tried to erase her story, you understand, tried to make people forget. But we remember. We pass it down, mother to child, friend to friend. Because what she did wasn't just about destruction. It was about showing us our own strength. She looked each child in the face, her gaze intense. They thought they could own us forever, thought we were just property, no more human than their cattle or cotton. But Abeni proved them wrong. She showed that even the most powerful master could be brought low by those he thought powerless. Rain began to fall outside, drumming on the cabin's roof. Adisa closed the primer gently, reverently. Some called her a demon, others an angel of vengeance. But she was just a woman who'd had enough, a woman who decided that if she couldn't have justice, she'd have fire instead. The children sat in silence, absorbing her words. Finally, the smallest boy spoke up. "Do you think she was afraid?" Adisa smiled sadly. "Oh yes, child. Fear was as much a part of her as breath, but she was tired of letting fear rule her. That's the real lesson of her story. Not the fire and death, but the courage to stand up when standing seems impossible." She settled back in her chair, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Remember this, children. Remember it deep in your bones. When they tell you you're nothing, when they try to break your spirit, think of Abeni. Think of how she burned the Master's world to the ground and proved we were never powerless." I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.